My name is Jonah Mercer. I teach chess to kids in a small town. I stood in a backyard under string lights. My cousin Clara married there. The woman in white held the air like a cold gust. The lawn went silent. The bride froze. Later, I took a microphone and spoke. I promised proof. I promised a plan to undo a house built on greed. Stay with me. I will show every step. I will show how one small gift opened a long game that ended with payback and something close to mercy. I remember the sound of a spoon clinking a glass. It stopped in midair. The light over the food table made the silk on the woman's dress shine like a thin pond. Close up, the fabric read as heavy, layered, finished. From where I stood, the dress seemed too formal for a backyard wedding, too loud among bunting and mason jars. My cousin Clara's face went pale. She tried to say something and found no voice. Her bridesmaids moved in the way people move when they try to touch a wound without hurting it. Mara, my sister-in-law, walked like a woman used to being watched. She stepped from the gravel path onto the grass with a slow, measured gait. The gown she wore had been taken from an old photograph and remade to fit an old command. Lace hugged the waist. A train floated out behind her like a trailing flag. The groom looked small beside her. He held a glass of champagne and kept his mouth closed. A child stepped over a loose string light and fell into the grass. No one laughed. The band kept playing an easy song. No one sang. The woman in white looked around as if examining a stage before a show. Her eyes found my face and held for a second. I felt a cold inside my ribs. I have taught kids to look 3 moves ahead and to notice small patterns. In that moment, I read a setup. The room had history. The room had rules. The silence tasted like a warning. Clara wanted a simple day, a day stripped of old measures. She wore a silk sundress earlier in the afternoon, the same dress she had worn when she told her friends she loved the groom. Her hands trembled when she tied the ribbon on a bouquet of peonies. Guests wore light colors and spoke with soft, ordinary voices. This was a place made to forget family weight. Mara did not arrive in simple clothes. She arrived in a gown lifted from someone else's wedding album. She had worn it once before during a courthouse ceremony 5 years earlier. She kept a framed photograph of that day at home, folded inside an evening clutch tonight. When she moved onto the grass, she looked like a woman reclaiming a prop. Conversation stopped in a single instant. A glass halfway to lips stayed there. A child's laugh fell flat. My mother's mouth formed a shape and she mouthed a single word to me: rage. It moved across her face like an insect under skin. I felt my own throat tighten. My chest filled with a pressure I have learned to listen to. It warns me when a slow game begins. A bridesmaid reached for the bride and lowered her voice. The bridesmaid said things in small bursts. The tenor of the air changed. Mara smiled with an ease born of someone who has been taught to own rooms. She shifted weight from foot to foot like a player nudging a piece toward a favored line. The groom watched and looked away. Somewhere behind him, a server set down a tray and did not move from the table. The moment held. You might think this was only about clothes. You might say people wear what they wear. That would miss the pattern. The Sterlings rule our town like weather. They measure people by coats, cars, titles, and postcards on mantles. They teach small hierarchies as if they were natural law. Clara wanted a day that refused that code. Mara in white put the old rules back into place in a single step. Clara's toast came out thin. She said she felt small. She said the ceremony was about love. Guests clapped politely with the staccato of people scoring a short speech. I heard old money settle back into its chair. I heard my grandfather's voice in my head. He used to say slow moves build a loss that looks accidental. I heard him and began to count in my head. 1 small move, 2 small moves, each one a step away from fairness. Family power survives in small gestures. A loan paid here or there. A job nixed for a slight reason. A favor called in at the right time. The Sterlings used 1,000 small acts to keep people off balance. If you glance away for one day, the board rearranges and pieces disappear. That is what Mara's dress did. It moved focus back to an old center. My grandfather taught me chess on a wooden board with mismatched pieces. He kept the board in a cedar box. The lid had faded letters. He never raised his voice. He taught by moving slowly and asking one small question after each move. He asked, "What happens next?" He made me think about reply and response and the cost of each choice. On his last birthday, he handed me a small velvet box, not an envelope. I opened it with a finger that shook. Inside sat a brass pawn with a dented base. It was tarnished and humble in appearance. He said the pawn came from his wedding day. He told me pieces hold memory. He told me small pieces carry strategies the eye misses. He asked me to promise two things: play with patience, keep records. 3 months later, he died. I kept the pawn on a shelf next to a leather journal that smelled like dust and lemon oil. I wrote notes in that journal, I made lists, I kept dates and small details. The pawn looked worthless. He smiled when he gave it to me. That smile felt like instruction. The pawn is a symbol for slow, careful work. It taught me to wait for an exchange where the reward is not immediate. After the wedding, people lilted between awkward laughter and the urge to forget. Guests lingered like leaves unwilling to fall. I did not forget. I asked Clara a clear question: who owned that dress? Her answer came in a whisper: the House of Sterling. They had a boutique in the city. They kept a second-hand closet they opened at family events. The phrase felt small and heavy. I asked who paid for decorations. I asked who handled the guest list. I wrote names on the notes app of my phone. I recorded small details. I found a torn label under a folding chair. The label had an address and a name in a handwriting I recognized. A boutique name linked to a ledger I had seen before in tax records. I took a photo. A florist told me a woman ordered extra bouquets after someone refused. A caterer said a check had bounced and been covered by a silent sponsor. A nephew saw a courier known to work for the Sterlings. Each witness offered a small thing. Each small thing alone felt trivial. Together the pieces formed a line. My grandfather's pawn felt less like a trinket and more like a marker. I began to plan moves. I kept a ledger of my own. I wrote dates and times, names and voices. Records are small, cold objects. They refuse the fog of memory. They force truth into form. I will tell this plainly. This story does not follow a clean moral path. I wanted justice. I also felt hunger. I wanted the shame fixed. I wanted family theft exposed. I wanted my mother safe from erasure. I wanted her life told honestly. I wanted more than correction. I wanted rebalancing. One night I found an old will in a drawer at my father's house. My father had died years before. The will was a mess of scribbles and a strange clause referencing a chess match after death. The lawyer who drafted it had left town years earlier. The will sat unread for years, a forgotten rule. The Sterlings had spent decades buying influence. Each injustice they committed read like a series of small harms. Their strategy relied on quiet acceptance. I refused. I felt a moral pull. I weighed my mother's stern warning. She said revenge ruins more than the target. She asked for care. I promised her a careful plan, but the hunger remained. It fed on old hurts. The will and the pawn formed a link. A game had been laid out for me by hands now gone. The stakes rose. I decided not to shout. Noise feeds rich houses and buries change. I wanted a reveal that felt inevitable. I built a frame. I booked a small slot on a county podcast that interviews local stories. I fed an anonymous tip to a blogger who obsesses over family scandals. I left a copy of my journal in a study room at the library where a Sterling niece worked. Every move read like a chess play. Each leak formed a triangle of pressure. I imagined a hall with 30 chairs. I stood at a microphone. My voice echoed against wood and plaster. I rehearsed what I would say. I practiced the order of evidence. The legal moves needed timing. Pressure in 3 places makes a ruler uneasy. The law may follow a paper trail. The media follows spectacle. The public follows outrage. My final lever was a pawn. It came from a velvet box and a ledger and a map. It was small and quiet. No one would notice a pawn in a piece of theater. A pawn sets things in motion slowly, then holds ground. I set the lever under the lights and waited. The pawn linked to a locket my grandfather gave my mother decades earlier. The locket held a photograph and a slip of paper with a number. The number matched an old safe deposit box at a rural bank. My mother avoided opening the box. She thought family property cursed. She kept the key in a knitting basket under a pile of half-used yarn cones. I found the key on a rainy night in a couch cushion, wet fringe clinging to the edges. The bank smelled like coffee and metal. The clerk looked at my ID and my name and hesitated. He handed me a wooden box when he realized the account had been my grandfather's. Inside, I found a single letter addressed to me. For Jonah, it said in my grandfather's loopy hand, "Follow small moves. Use them well." The letter included a crudely drawn map to a place named Willow Hollow and a small chess puzzle scribble. The map had a place name that sounded made up. Willow Hollow felt like a ghost made into a place. The puzzle worked as a code. It gave a key for a lock and a place to go. I drove at dawn. The sky was a low bowl of gray. The air smelled like river and wet earth. Willow Hollow looked like a village in a postcard. A cluster of cottages sat by a slow river. A bakery with a flacking sign and a woman named Agnes behind the counter greeted me like a long memory. She remembered my grandfather. She kept a box of receipts tied with string. She handed me the box like a small confession. Inside were torn envelopes and old receipts and lists of names. People had record entries for loans called in, for jobs terminated, for houses repossessed. Each page read like a move made by a hand that never named itself. The ledger showed a predatory pattern. It showed small loans tightened into traps. It recorded favors turned into leverage. It listed people who lost work after a quiet complaint. Agnes spoke softly. My grandfather had visited often and left packages. He told her to keep records of wrong moves in case someone learned to look. He called the ledger an unfinished lesson. She gave me a small key with worn edges. The key fit the puzzle from his letter. The chessboard shifted under my fingers. The ledger was ugly and clear. I took photos. I copied names into my journal. A pattern formed. The Sterlings had been using shell-buying moves. They had nudged neighbors into sales and then used influence to steer municipal contracts. They built a network of small concessions that knit together into power. My plan began to take shape like a phrase remembered after sleep. I told my mother about Willow Hollow at her kitchen table. The sunlight came through lace curtains and the room smelled like cinnamon from a late morning tea. She handed me a faded photograph of my father. He looked younger, bitter, and tired. She warned me. Revenge ruins more than targets. She told me to take care. I promised to be careful. I said I wanted repair and not ruin. Clara did not shout. She only said she wanted her day back. She wanted to feel small no more. I asked her if she wanted public shame. She answered with a short sentence, "Expose them but spare the children." Her words sank into me like a stone into soft mud. I kept a list of payers, accounts, and dates. I prepared for leverage and not for ruin. The moral strain grew. Every time I said a move, I thought of consequences. Someone loses a job, a child hears gossip. I thought of my grandfather's words about patience and records. A chess player sacrifices a piece only with reason. I weighed my steps as if walking across thin ice. I made sure my moves aimed at systems and not souls. I went to the public records office and sat under a fluorescent light. I read property transfers and corporate filings. Shell companies appeared across pages. A transfer listed a tobacco shed address that had been unused for years. The papers read like a maze. I called an old friend who runs a small law firm. He owed me a favor from when I taught his niece chess. He looked at my photos and said a single word: fraud. He suggested a subpoena. Lawyers cost money. I had little. I offered him a trade. I would teach his niece chess in exchange for filing a motion to freeze suspicious accounts. He took the offer without hesitation and made a move on my board. A legal motion slipped into a courthouse file. Notice arrived at the Sterling trustee's office in a sealed envelope. Panic moves faster than planning. The Sterlings began to show cracks. Leaks and letters put pressure on a house built on discretion. The trustee called a private meeting. The trustee's face looked thin under bright light. The legal world is slow and dumb like a heavy beast. But when paper meets public record, the beast stirs. I fed the beast with a sequence of small evidences and a friend who could file. The first trap closed. I invited the Sterlings to a family dinner as if nothing had changed. The table under the chandelier smelled of roast meat and orange peel. The house held old portraits. The air was heavy with voices that meant to be polite. I sat across from Mara and watched her hands. She folded a napkin more times than necessary. I opened with a short story about a pawn. I spoke of a pawn becoming a queen after patient moves. I described small choices and inheritance and the need for records. I placed my journal on the table like a small, blunt instrument. People laughed at first, an uneasy sound. Then a courier arrived with a sealed letter. A lawyer's motion had reached their trustee. The trustee's face lost color. Mara reached for a napkin and fumbled. My cousin Clara stood. Her voice shook at first and then grew. She read a page from the Willow Hollow ledger out loud. Her words landed like stones. Arguments rose. Voices went from polite to clipped. My mother held my hand under the table, fingers hard and trusting. The Sterlings' faces fell. A mask of confidence cracked into surprise. People who have power without scrutiny flinch when light comes near. I sat still and watched. The dinner shifted from ritual to trial. I did not want wholesale ruin. I wanted repair and boundaries. I wanted the Sterlings off the municipal bodies where they held sway. I wanted restitution in some form. I offered a choice. I would sign a public statement and limit press exposure in exchange for immediate restructure of family holdings. The trustee balked. Mara snarled with the sound of someone losing a script. The lawyer whispered into a phone. My friend from the law firm leaned toward me and mouthed words about escrow and timed buyouts. My mother's eyes did not leave my hands. Clara stepped outside and lit a cigarette in private like someone anchoring herself. She returned calmer. She said yes. She asked for an accounting and a public apology. She asked the Sterlings to step away from town services. Under pressure, the family signed papers that night. The Sterlings' agreement felt like a checkmate where the winner refuses the last blow. It felt like mercy shaped into a rule. Outside the house, neighbors muttered in the dark and headlights slashed the street. The press would find a version of the story in the morning. The legal machinery would walk more steps. For now, the papers signed moved power from hands like a tide moving back a shoreline. Willow Hollow had more to tell. The ledger exposed a second line of family care that Grandpa had quietly funded. One name linked to a seamstress who ran a small shop. She had hidden savings invested in community trusts. My grandfather had fed those trusts with small payments over years. He used odd accounting to protect funds from family predators. The map and chess puzzle led me to a modest schoolhouse. It sat behind a fence overgrown with honeysuckle. Inside, it held a ledger and a stack of bonds. The bonds were small and dated. They held enough to seed a handful of scholarships and to pay bills for people who had been pushed out. My chest tightened when I realized how quiet he had been. My grandfather's method had been public sacrifice and private care. He used one hand to arrange a public loss while the other hand built a private reserve. The Sterlings never found the schoolhouse. They never looked for a place a grandfather thought of as a home. The funds paid for college for Clara's cousin and for hospital bills for a farmer. The real wealth had been hidden in service. The discovery felt like uncovering a truth someone had buried to save people from a certain kind of cruelty. Grandpa's moves were small and firm. He protected teachers, bakers, and farmers. He believed in slow repair. The Sterlings taped each other's applause while a hidden line of support grew from quiet payments and careful notes. No play happens without cost. People lost jobs when auditors looked. A cousin who supported Mara lost work after an inquiry. Children faced awkward talk at school. Social lines split. Mara cried in private and told me how trapped she felt. She said the dress had been both defiance and mourning. She had borrowed a gown to feel seen on a day she once thought she deserved. Her admission made my anger twist into something harder to hold. I felt pity and anger in the same breath. A hand that lifts a stone might crush a flower under it. My mother said something that lodged in my bones. Justice and kindness sit on different squares of a board. Choose the square with care. I lost nights of sleep. I woke thinking of moves not yet played. I worried for people who would pay for a truth revealed. I thought of small children who might feel the sting of gossip, and for families who would figure out how to map their days under new pressures. The cost was real, and it taught me to weigh mercy against exposure. We filed papers. The trustee stepped down. The Sterlings made public apologies with voices that tried for sincerity and landed somewhere between routine and real. Their boutique lost municipal contracts. A few shops owned by the family kept comfortable lives. Power left hands and entered civic hands. The schoolhouse gained formal recognition and a small endowment. Clara received a scholarship fund named after our father. Mara enrolled in a community class and helped at Agnes's bakery in Willow Hollow. She learned to sew and to fold dough and to live without a script that demanded her wear a crown. I kept the pawn on my desk. Students won tournaments and placed the pawn forward like a talisman. I moved it across the board when a win arrived. The press called our story a small-town scandal. Social feeds labeled people winners and losers. The tags felt shallow. The better outcome was slow repair. Kids finished school. A farmer paid his bills. A teacher felt a grip loosen from a contract. People returned to work. The Sterlings kept comfortable homes. They lost power. I lost sleep and gained an uneasy peace. There is a cost to truth and a cost to mercy. The balance remains complex. I speak now as a man who played a long game. You watch revenge stories for two reasons. One, you want fairness. Two, you want meaning. My plan gave both with limits. I chose to protect people while exposing wrong. I took a pawn from a cedar box and moved toward a queen through patient moves. The lesson is plain. Keep records of small harms. Gather facts. Use law when needed. Hold mercy in reserve. If you face family wrong, guard yourself and those who are vulnerable. Make moves that change systems and not souls. Build pressure in legal and public ways. Offer paths for repair. End with care. I will tell you what I held while I moved. I held a pawn and a ledger. I held the memory of a man who taught me to wait and to write. I held my mother's warning and Clara's wish to feel large. I held a choice each night before sleep. I could have let hunger into full meal and torched a family. I did not. I chose pressure balanced with rescue. Listen to small pieces. Their voices are quiet but precise. Keep records, ask questions. And count moves as if you play chess and life at the same time. Moves matter. Small moves build great results.